We knew we were going to get a 60-game season, but we now know who the New York Mets will play, when they will play, where they will play, and what time it will be. And it is just a very interesting schedule. It's not an easy schedule, though. There are your fair share of easy games because you are going to play the Marlins and you are going to play the Orioles. And even a team like the Blue Jays, who do have a lot of young talent, so they might be better than you expect, definitely will be better than they were last year. I don't think it'll be an automatic cakewalk, especially because that's a team that the Mets are not familiar with, so really anything could happen. That's the other really tricky thing about this, is that I tried my best to kind of do like a predictions and what I think may happen in each series, but it all comes down to matchups. We don't know if the Mets have a good pitcher out there. Will the Phillies have a good pitcher out there? We don't know. Will there be rain? Will there be an injury that happens during the game? Who will have the day off? Who's suspended? Who's sick? That's going to be a really big concern in this particular season. So there's a lot of different elements that are going to happen. Does Familia have his command that particular game? There's a lot of unknowns, but we could try our best to have a rough idea of what could happen and what it might lead to. But a couple of things before we start. Number one, I saw that the Braves were replaced by the Pittsburgh Pirates in an earlier graphic. That obviously not the case. The Mets opening day is against the Atlanta Braves. So much for that. That's out the window, which is really disappointing because when I first saw that, I was extremely excited because I was like, you know what? The Mets struggled a lot with the Atlanta Braves. Braves have won the division the last 2 years, have a ton of talent, and still are extremely good. Probably win the division again. So I was much more excited to play the Pittsburgh Pirates instead, who one of the worst teams, not only in the National League, but all of baseball, who the Mets did extremely well against, especially in the second half of last year. So I was looking forward to playing them instead of Atlanta. Obviously, that is not in the equation anymore, so scratch that. Mets schedule just got a lot tougher. I really felt that was the difference between at least 3 games winning or losing. Like, that's how much of a difference I believe it makes the drop-off between the Mets playing Atlanta and Pittsburgh. So that's out the window, and that is really frustrating. But let's talk about the splits that the New York Mets had against these particular teams last year, because it's going to be very important. How did you do in your division? Because that's all you got this year. It is all about the division. You don't get to play the Pirates again. You don't get to play the American League Central again. The Mets were really lucky they got to play the Central last year because you got to face the Tigers, you got to face the White Sox, you got to face the Royals. The Mets did well against the Cleveland Indians, and better than the Minnesota Twins than I would have expected, especially in Minnesota. The Mets had that one huge game where they had double-digit runs, which I really did not plan for at all. But then again, when the Mets played them at Citi Field, they had a terrible stretch. I know it was Jacob deGrom and Noah Syndergaard's worst 2 outings of the year. Luckily, deGrom and pretty much Noah both turned it around from that point on, especially deGrom. Noah was still inconsistent, but it's another thing. We don't even have him this year, so that's one guy that you can't really factor into the equation too much. But the splits, 8-11 against the Atlanta Braves. They obviously played Atlanta a lot, and they lost most of the games, and every game was just so tough. There was not a single easy game that the Mets had against the Braves. I mean, that's just how good their talent is, particularly in that starting lineup with Met killers down the line. The combination of Albies and Acuna and Freeman and Markakis, and last year you had Josh Donaldson, who was out of this world against the Mets. He's not on the team anymore. Replaced by Marcell Ozuna, who did really well in the Mets franchise mode against the virtual Mets. We don't know exactly how he will do against them in real life. Hopefully not as good as he did in the video game, because Marcell Ozuna has had his inconsistencies. Obviously, we've seen him play against the Mets when he was with the Cardinals, and more importantly, when he was with the Marlins, definitely saw a lot of him. But Marcell Ozuna will have his good years, have his bad years, good stretches, bad stretches. So we don't know. I mean, he could be another Met killer like Josh Donaldson, or maybe he doesn't. I mean, he's still going to do better against the Mets than he would against other teams. But I don't anticipate having him quite as good a year as Josh Donaldson did, because Donaldson did really well last year. So I don't necessarily anticipate that, but he's still a quality bat. He's still going to get production. And the thing with Atlanta is Freddie Freeman being sick and Nick Markakis opting out of the season. Those are 2 very important things. Will Freeman play this year? That's a bit of an unknown. That's really your personal preference for him. Like, if he or some other important guys, DJ LeMahieu, Joey Gallo, if those guys want to sit out, or Mike Trout, Garrett Cole, whoever it is, by all means, sit out. Because I know that we're a Met fans, or you're a Texas Ranger fan, or whatever fan you are. For me, the people and the players, they come first. Whoever wants to opt out, more than willing to let them opt out. I have no problem with whoever opts out. I really think that your safety, and especially the safety of your family, should come first. It is terrible that Mike Trout has to feel obligated to play because he is Mike Trout, he's the best player in baseball. He has to put his newborn baby at risk. I don't think that's right. The same with Gerrit Cole, one of the best pitchers. The biggest offseason accusation, very important to the Yankees. Yankee fans have very high expectations for him and the rest of the team. If Gerrit Cole wants to opt out, I know I'm not a Yankees fan. He got the. If Jacob deGrom wants to opt out because he has very young kids, he could too, and I'd be perfectly fine with that because I care about Jake and I care about his family, and I want all of them to be healthy. I don't want to see him put them at risk by him catching some kind of virus or anything like that. So I think that before we even really look at the season and the breakdown of how many games you have against each particular team and what date it is, we really have to keep in mind, will this baseball season even happen? I know we got the mandated thing through, we got the agreements and disagreements out of the way, but the fact that we have already had testing problems, we've had players opt out, and more importantly, players test positive, I think that is a huge red flag already because the thing is that they just reported July 1st and we're still a couple weeks away from even playing any games at all. So I think we really have to keep an eye on that. We can't 100% guarantee that baseball is going to happen because if testing keeps being a problem and players keep getting positive tests or God forbid coaches get sick because they're much more high risk and they God forbid die, we're in a huge problem here. So before we get carried away, let's just get that settled. Let's just have that in mind before we really dive into what I think may happen during the course of the regular season. I just want to get that out of the way. This is if there is a baseball here because I think we really have to keep in mind who's opting out and who's getting sick because that has happened way too fast. Within the first couple days, we already have all these issues. That's really concerning to me because, again, you still have such a long way to go. And if there even is a second wave in the fall, right around playoff time, still a lot of red flags, a lot of things to keep an eye out for, but we just have to hope for the best and go with what we have. We still know that as of right now, as of recording this video, everything is still on schedule. Everything is still on track. We're still practicing. Some teams have to close down because they're waiting for their test results to get back or the amount of positive tests they have already within the organization. So that's another huge problem. But to continue on with the splits, they were 2-2 against the Yankees. And the Yankees and Mets thing is always a tricky thing because you're like, all right, well, yes, the Yankees obviously have the better team than the Mets. But the Mets don't necessarily just lie down for the Yankees. They still play relatively tough. Splitting the season series, the Mets had good games against the Yankees and they had really bad games against the Yankees. The one that stands out was the doubleheader they had. They had the terrible day game, but then they won the nightcap. So I kind of see the same thing happening where they split it. I don't think either team necessarily dominates it. I think, maybe the Yankees take one more game than the Mets or something like that. Nothing too crazy. Then you have the Philadelphia Phillies, which I think was there were two really interesting splits the Mets had in the division. The first one was the Phillies. They were 7-12 against Philadelphia. That's pretty surprising considering that the Mets finished with a better record than Philadelphia. And the Phillies definitely had a lot of struggles, but their lineup gave the Mets a tough time. I mean, that middle of the order between Bryce Harper, Rhys Hoskins, and JT Realmuto was not easy to navigate around. And the Phillies lost Andrew McCutchen, who was playing well for them when the season first started. Now they're going to have him back. You want to see what that does. You want to see the addition of Didi Gregorius. More importantly, the addition of Joe Girardi. So the Phillies are going to be even better. So the Mets have to be careful. Philadelphia could be definitely a sneaky team. And the Mets, they obviously got to play better against Philadelphia than they did. They blew some big late games. I mean, especially in, I believe it was either June or July, where the Mets had a series in Philadelphia where, Edwin Diaz was his usual self, completely botching the lead and blowing the save, and the Mets lose the game late. Todd Frazier hit a huge home run, unexpected, but then Edwin Diaz blows it right in the bottom half of the inning. So you can't let that happen again. Obviously, the bullpen has got to be better. It's only a 60-game season, so if Familia blows a game, or Diaz, or Lugo, or whoever blows it, you don't have a bunch of games to make up for it. Every game is crucial, so obviously the bullpen has to be better. The guys have got to bounce back. Maybe there are some prospects coming. Maybe these guys will bounce back. Maybe the addition of Dellin Betances is that huge. And there still is a lot of question marks with the bullpen, and we won't really know until the season actually happens. But the other interesting one was the 12-7 split against the Washington Nationals, who are a better team than the Phillies, won the World Series. Meanwhile, the Mets did much better against them than they did against the Phillies, which is something you really wouldn't expect when you just look at the Phillies and the Nationals, the two completely different years that they had. But again, that's what plays into matchups. You know what? Maybe the Mets do well against the Red Sox, but they don't do well against Tampa Bay. Again, it's all about matchups and how the splits work out and who you face and how good they do against you, because maybe the Mets don't do well against the Tampa bullpen. but maybe they could do well against the Red Sox starting rotation. You just never know how these games are going to go out. That's one of the things about baseball. It's probably the hardest one to predict in my mind because there are just so many factors, and the inconsistencies within all the teams is just really mind-blowing because, one day that you have the guy give you a good start, and then the next game he gives you a terrible start. And then one game the reliever looks lights out, then he's not so good, and just errors and bad calls by umpires. A lot of different things could happen throughout a baseball game. And that's why you play the games. That is why it is always very hard to predict who necessarily will go all the way. I mean, we thought the Astros have been a lock the past couple of years. Ever since 2017, the Astros have not been the same team. I know the scandal, but still, I mean, when they got Greinke and they had Cole, I mean, you could take it to the bank. Astros, Astros, Astros. Didn't happen. Washington Nationals come out of nowhere. So that definitely can happen within the course of the baseball season. And I have a feeling something like that might happen again this year with the 60-game season because you are going to see a lot of weird things happen, especially with all the different rules that we have, the DH, extra innings, expanded rosters, no fans, very limited interleague play. You're not playing a team in the Central. You're not playing a team in the West. So a lot of different things happening this year. And then what was really important for the Mets was going 13-6 against the Miami Marlins. That was really good. And they have got to keep that up because they do play in a tough division because Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Washington are all really good teams. All can make the playoffs. But Miami, not so much, and you really want to take advantage of them. That's something that the Mets have failed to do in the past, that even though the Marlins finished with a terrible record, still give the Mets a really tough time and win the games against the Mets that they really shouldn't have. The Mets have definitely had a bunch of disappointing losses against the Marlins forever. I mean, ever since the collapses in 07-08 where the Marlins stick it to them at the end of the season, the Mets just tend to lose weird games against the Marlins. They had a big-time sweep against Miami that they lost where it looked like Mickey Callaway should have been fired and never was, ended up making it through the year. So a lot of crazy things happened. But let's go into the season and what I think the Mets' overall record could be. So they start the season going up against the Atlanta Braves. Opening day, this will be at Citi Field. And you know what? Because the Mets do really well on opening day and in the very, very beginning of the season, I see the Mets winning this series, probably taking 2 out of 3, I would say, is my outcome that I would predict for that. So you're off to a good start, 2-1 on the year. Then they go to Boston, into Fenway Park for a 4-game set, where I see the Mets splitting it. I don't really see either team taking 3 out of 4 or even sweeping the entire series. I don't think that either team is all that amazing that they could pull that off. I don't think the Mets are that good, or the Red Sox are good enough to really just pull it off. So I see them just kind of splitting it down the middle, 2 out of 4. I think that's very fair for either side. Then they go for a 4-game set in Atlanta, which I just get a bad feeling about that. They don't do well in Truist Park. They obviously have a much better chance at Citi Field. Atlanta has just been a nightmare for the Mets, even when it wasn't Truist Park, even in the original Atlanta Stadium. Mets have always struggled in that particular state, so you don't like your chances there. I say 1 out of 4 there. I really don't anticipate much. Then you have a 2-game set against the Nationals, coming right off the Atlanta series. I don't like down either. I see the Mets going 0-2 there. I feel like that's going to be a really bad stretch for them. But luckily for them, they have a good stretch of games coming up later in the year, in the beginning of September, which I think is probably going to be the make or break for the Mets because I do see them losing these games in the middle of the year, like I said, against Atlanta, against Washington. But later on in the year, when you're playing Miami more and you're playing Baltimore and you're playing Toronto, you have got to win those games. If you don't, you're done because the 60-game season, we know you're going to lose against the Nationals. You're going to lose against the Braves, probably against the Yankees, the Phillies. There's still too many tough teams that you can't lose to the bad teams as well. You can't lose all the time. You got to win some games here or there. But after that stretch against Washington, home against the Marlins, I see them taking 2 out of 3 there. A nice little bounce back. I don't know about a sweep because, again, the Marlins tend to win some sneaky games, so I don't see a sweep there. Then they face the Nationals for a 4-game set at Citi Field. I see them taking 2 out of 4. They're not going to lose all the games against the Nationals, but they're not going to win all of them. That's kind of the way it went. There were a lot of splits. There were a lot of back and forth. Nationals win, Mets win. There was not really that many sweeps either way for those two teams in the head-to-head matchups because you look at the season record of 12-7, you saw they won some, they lost some, but for the most part did pretty well against Washington. I don't know if the same thing is going to apply here. Ryan Zimmerman sitting out, Joe Ross sitting out, but they still have that great rotation of Scherzer, Strasburg, Patrick Corbin, even Anibal Sanchez is a sneaky good pitcher, and then the addition of Will Harris, plus having a full year out of Daniel Hudson. I was calling him Dakota. No, that's from the Cardinals. And then Sean Doolittle. The Mets did well against him last year, but for the most part, that was not a common thing, historical. The Mets usually didn't do well against Doolittle in years past. Now, Sean Doolittle is a pretty good reliever, and the Nationals' bullpen in general is just better than it was in the beginning of last year. And obviously, the team, they were so bad in the early part of the year. obviously got better. And they could be riding off the momentum of winning the World Series, but then again, you also could have that, World Series hangover, which is a very real thing. I mean, when was the last team that actually went back-to-back in the World Series? You have to go back a really long way. Probably the Yankees of the 90s, and even before that. Not something that happens frequently. It has to be a complete dynasty in order to go back-to-back. You need to have like the 70s Reds or just an insane team in order to pull that off. So the Nationals, they're definitely going to have an interesting year. But after that series against Washington, they're going to face Philadelphia, where I see them taking 1 of 3. Because, again, Philadelphia is a tough team. It's going to be their first matchup against them. So I see the Mets only taking 1 out of that 3-game set. Then they have a nice little 4-game set against the Marlins, where I see them taking 3 out of 4 because middle of the year, it's usually where the Mets do well. And again, Miami is not the greatest of teams. The Mets should win those games. At least they have to win those games because with them playing, again, all these other tough teams, they just have to win that 3-game, at least 3 against the Miami in that one. Then they face the Yankees, where I see them taking 1 out of 3 there because, again, the Yankees are tough. They have such a good roster. The Mets are not going to win all their games against the Yankees. They're just going to flat out lose. I don't say they're going to lose all of them, but I see them taking at least 1 out of the 3 in that series. Next one, Miami sweep. They have to at least sweep the Marlins once, I would imagine. I mean, they did that last year, so at least one of the series they have got to sweep against Miami. Then they're going to face the Yankees again, where I see them taking 2 out of 3 because the Mets are going to lose the series against the Yankees and they're going to win the series against the Yankees. I mean, just that's historical, and that's just what my gut tells me. That's what my brain tells me, looking at the teams, looking at the schedule, all that different stuff. That's the way I see that going. Then I see them winning the 2 games against the Orioles. The Orioles are not a very good team, and again, those are games the Mets have to win because if the Mets don't go 2 out of 2 against the Orioles, again, they're in big trouble because they're going to lose games elsewhere. Then 2 out of 4 against Philadelphia because, again, you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. 4-game set, neither team is going to sweep, so let's just call it a split. Another 2-game set against Baltimore. I see them taking 1 out of the 2. Not saying the Mets are going to win every single game against the Orioles because that's not fair to expect. I mean, what team actually goes undefeated against another particular team? That is not something that happens often in baseball, so the Mets have to lose at least 1 against Baltimore. After the Baltimore set, the Mets are going to face the Toronto Blue Jays, where I see them taking 2 out of 3. Again, it's hard to sweep a team, so I do think the Mets should still win the series because Toronto still has questions to answer. They do have a lot of nice young talent, especially in the lineup. Bo Bichette, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Kevin Biggio, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. They have a lot of nice prospects coming up the minor leagues. They added Hyun-Jin Ryu. So the Blue Jays, they have some talent, but not a lot. The Mets still should be able to win the series against them. Then I'd see him taking 1 out of 3 against Philadelphia. Again, Philly just played him tough last year, and they have improved. So I don't see why the same thing would happen, why Philadelphia would not be a tough matchup for the Mets again. Then 2 out of 3 against Atlanta, only because it's late in the year, and the Mets tend to do much better late in the year. I mean, think of that very, very last series of the season. The Mets won it against the Atlanta Braves, which is not something they did earlier in the year. They lost so much against the Braves, but then last series of the year, they win it. So I just feel like that the Mets usually finish at the very, very end strong. It's right up to that where they struggle, and then obviously June, which you're not going to have. So it obviously is going to be a very different season. Then 1 out of 3 against Tampa Bay. I don't know why. I just get a bad feeling against Tampa Bay. I don't know why. I don't think the Mets match up well with them. I really, really don't. Tampa Bay is such a tough and smart team. They're going to put the ball in play, and they have an amazing bullpen, which the Mets strike out a lot and have a terrible bullpen. So I just see the Mets having a really, really bad series against the Rays. I don't know why. It just, for some reason, that is what my gut tells me. And maybe I'm wrong, but I see the Mets taking at least 1 game out of Tampa. And then the last game is a 4-game set against the Washington Nationals, where I see the Mets at least splitting it. Again, neither team is going to take all 4 games. Even 3 out of 4 is kind of pushing it. So I see the Mets splitting it 2 apiece. And all in all, that would finish the Mets season with a 32-28 record. Now, it's a winning record. It's more than half your games you won. But will it be enough to get you over the top? I'm not sure because nobody really knows what's going to be the key number to really get a playoff spot in this particular year. We know that in a traditional season, if you can win at least close to 90 games, you have a really good chance of at least being a wild card team. But when it's 32 games, it is pretty tough. And I think that's a pretty fair record for the Mets. Not saying they're going to be a losing team, but they'll be a winning team by a couple of games, the same way they did last year. And it's like, oh, well, don't you think the Mets improved a little bit from last year? Yes, but the problem is that they're facing too much of the Braves, too much Phillies, Nationals, Yankees, Rays, and Red Sox. Those are not easy teams. You're just going to balance it out by playing, again, Baltimore, Miami, and Toronto. The fact that the Mets don't play Pittsburgh, and again, you don't play the Tigers and the Royals and the Padres and the Rockies and the Giants, the Cardinals, the Brewers, like the Reds, there's just too many other teams that you used to play that the outcomes are just going to be different. There is no way you could tell me that the Mets are just going to win a bunch of games against the Nationals and the Braves and the Phillies. Those teams are just too good. And the same could be said for those teams. The Mets aren't just going to lose all those games, but they're not going to win all of them. It's going to be very down the middle. There's going to be a lot of splits. Mets are going to win some series. Mets are going to lose some series. That's just the way baseball goes. So I think the Mets being a few games over 500 is a very fair record for them. But I would be curious to know, what is your prediction for the New York Mets season? What kind of record do you think they finish with? How do you think they match up against some of these particular teams? Are they a bad matchup against the Rays? Will they be better against the Phillies this year? Are they not as good against the Nationals this year? I would be very curious to hear what is your guys' take on that, because that's just my personal opinion. And I could be dead wrong. Maybe the Mets are a lot better. Maybe the Mets are a lot worse. We never know, because there's a couple things to be very mindful of. Number one, again, baseball is very unpredictable. And more importantly, the Mets are even more unpredictable, because we always have the idea of they are one team and they turn out to be a completely other team. They'll have a really good stretch and they'll have a really bad stretch. Win one, lose two, win two, lose three. That's just the way it has gone for the Mets in recent years. But I hope you guys did enjoy this video. A little bit of a prediction and kind of a schedule reaction. And, just let me know what you guys think about the schedule and the other teams. What do you think about the expectations for the Yankees or the Rays or the Red Sox? I'd be curious to get your take on any of those teams. And, be on the lookout for anything else going on with the channel. Like, comment, and you can subscribe. That's always a nice thing to do. Get the channel growing. We're at 50. Halfway to 100, let's get another 50, you know what I mean? One day at a time, a video at a time. That's just the way I'm going about it. And I definitely have appreciated all the support I've gotten throughout this whole, sports hiatus, and just ever since I've started the channel last year, almost exactly a year ago. So obviously not a big channel, but we are getting there, and I have met some new people that I never thought I would have met. So definitely have appreciated the support and the dialogue that I've had with all of you in the comment section. And until the next one, be safe, be smart, be healthy, and I'll see you then.